My name is Ellie. I'm 36 years old and I work as a financial manager at a small investment firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. 6 years ago, I married Thomas, the man I thought would be my safe harbor for life. Thomas wasn't overly romantic, but he was kind, calm, and always made me feel heard. We weren't perfect, but we made a great team. We lived in a small vintage house in the suburbs. Every morning he made the coffee, I made breakfast. We had our disagreements, sure, but we always worked them out before bed. It was those simple routines that made me feel like the luckiest woman. That is, until Avery, my younger sister, reappeared in my life, bringing with her a storm I never saw coming. Avery is 4 years younger than me. She had been living in Austin with her ex-boyfriend, a flashy, boastful lawyer I never liked. They broke up suddenly, I never got the details. One day she just called, her voice tight and cracking. "I don't have anywhere else to go." I knew Avery wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, so hearing her voice like that made my heart sink. I said right away, "Come home. Stay with Mom and Dad if you want, or we have a spare room." A few days later, Avery rolled her suitcase onto my porch just before midnight. Her eyes were shadowed, her lips pale, and it was obvious she'd been crying the whole drive from Texas to North Carolina. I hugged her tight, hiding the creeping anxiety in my chest. Avery had always been the princess in Mom's eyes. Ballet recitals, expensive lace dresses, her own curling iron in elementary school, she had it all. Me? I was happy with a pair of running shoes and a good book. Dad loved me, but he was soft. And Mom? She never hid her favoritism. Even after all those years apart, I thought time and distance might have softened the past. I wanted to believe that now, as adults, we could start fresh. She stayed with our parents for the first few weeks, but then she started calling me almost every night, complaining about being controlled, saying, "Mom still thinks I'm 17. I understood that feeling. So I brought it up to Thomas. He's an HR manager at a large software company in Uptown. Knowing Avery had a degree in communications, I asked, "Would you mind checking if your company has any roles that might fit her? I don't want her falling further behind." Thomas hesitated but agreed. He'd met Avery a few times during the holidays and used to describe her as sweet but unpredictable. A week later, she landed a job in internal comms. The starting salary wasn't bad. Avery lit up like a kid on Christmas morning, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I thought things were going to be okay. I believed I was doing the right thing, but it turns out I was the one who opened the door and invited the storm in. Things started changing about 2 months after Avery started working at Thomas's company. At first it was little things, private conversations between them. I noticed that whenever I walked into the living room, they'd burst out laughing mid-sentence, then glance at each other like they'd shared something I wasn't meant to hear. When I asked what was funny, Thomas would shrug. "Just work stuff." Avery would beam. "You wouldn't get it, Ellie." I'm not a suspicious person. I trusted my husband. But over time, an unease began creeping in, quiet, cold, and relentless, like water seeping under the floor. One Wednesday afternoon, I got off work earlier than usual. I came in through the back door, an old habit from my college days. The door was already open. The kitchen was silent, but I could hear laughter upstairs. My steps slowed as I recognized the voices. Avery and Thomas. They were talking, and then came laughter. Intimate and oddly warm. I called out, "Thomas?" The footsteps upstairs stopped immediately. A few moments later, Thomas came down, looking calm and casual. "You're home early. Avery and I were working on some slides for Friday's presentation." Avery followed right behind him, still holding her laptop. She smiled like she belonged there. I didn't say much, but I couldn't shake the growing discomfort. A week later, I noticed something strange. I'm a creature of habit. Even the way I make the bed follows a routine. I always fold the blanket neatly with the pillow openings facing the headboard. A tiny habit, but mine. That afternoon, when I walked into our bedroom, I froze. The pillows were off-center. One of the pillowcases was flipped the wrong way. I stared at the bed, heart pounding, trying to reason it out. Maybe I was tired. Maybe Thomas made the bed. I went downstairs and asked, "Did you go into our bedroom today?" Thomas looked up from his phone, startled. "No, why?" The bed was different, the pillows were off. He laughed lightly. "Maybe you were rushing this morning and didn't notice. I didn't touch anything." I didn't push it, but that night, I couldn't sleep. All the little things were adding up. The looks they shared, the cut-off conversations, how Avery seemed to be at my house every time I came home. One day I called Avery during lunch. It rang for a long time, then went to voicemail. I didn't think much of it, until Thomas texted me saying he was out to lunch with coworkers. In the selfie he sent, Avery was right beside him, holding a smoothie and smiling wide. No one said anything wrong, no one crossed a clear line, but I felt like I was slowly being pushed out of my own life, gently, quietly, without a trace. I started coming home earlier, hoping to catch something more concrete than a misaligned pillow, but each time they were there. Smiling, cheerful, discreet. I had no proof, but I knew. Some part of me was screaming, something's not right. Something is happening in your own home, Ellie. And I was still clinging to whatever piece I had left, like gripping a railing in a storm that hadn't fully formed. I never thought I'd have to question the man I chose to marry, but the more I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, the more the truth started showing through, like a crack in glass, small but impossible to ignore. That Friday night, I suggested a weekend getaway to Asheville. It was a place we used to visit after we got married, pine forests and cozy cafes tucked in the mountains. Thomas agreed immediately, even seemed excited, but I had a purpose. I needed to know. I needed an answer. That evening, after a romantic dinner by the lake, we took a walk through the historic district. Thomas held my hand like always, told stories about work, added in a few soft jokes. I listened, but my mind was making a plan. That night, in our rented wooden cabin, after washing up and getting ready for bed, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him. "Thomas," I said, voice low but steady, "I need to ask you something. You and Avery. Something's off. I've felt it for a while, but now, I want the truth. Is there something going on between you two?" He stood still for a moment, still buttoning his pajama shirt. I saw his eyes shift, a flash of surprise, then avoidance. "What are you saying, Ellie? You think I'd... with your sister?" I stayed silent, waiting. He stepped closer and then exhaled, a long breath, like he was letting go of everything. His eyes reddened and his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. Ellie, I didn't mean for it to go this far. It started with talking, just talking. Avery really understands me, then things just happened. I couldn't stop it. I don't know how long I sat there. Everything around me froze. The words echoed like they came from another world. Tomas? The man I once trusted more than anyone was now standing in front of me, confessing to a betrayal with my own sister. Was it in our house? I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. He lowered his head, said nothing. That silence hurt more than any confession. I stood up, grabbed my coat and purse, and walked out of the cabin without looking back. One thought ran through my mind. I couldn't spend another second next to him. I drove back to Charlotte in the middle of the night, the sound of rain tapping on the windshield and my heart pounding in my chest. I don't even remember how I made it home. When I pulled into the driveway, the sun was already rising, and the emptiness inside me had never felt more real. Thomas came back that afternoon in an Uber. He brought a suitcase and eyes full of guilt. I didn't say a word, just walked into the bedroom and closed the door. He packed a few things and left. For good this time. I called a lawyer the next morning. No tears, no dramatic scenes. Just an end. Clear and final. I called my parents too. They already knew. And what took my breath away wasn't Avery's betrayal. It was my mother's response. "It's unfortunate, Ellie, but she deserves to be happy too. You and Thomas weren't the same anymore. Maybe things happen for a reason." I stayed quiet, then hung up. I didn't need to hear another word. I moved out of the house 3 weeks later, sold everything, erased every trace of a marriage that had died long ago. And I locked every door, not just to Thomas but to Avery, and to a family who thought I could forgive the unforgivable. I used to think no matter what happened, at least my parents would stand by me. But maybe once again I'd been naive to expect loyalty from people who always saw life through Avery's lens. After Thomas left and I filed for divorce, I drove to my parents' house one Saturday afternoon, not to ask them to take my side, just to hear some acknowledgement that I was the one who'd been hurt. But the first thing my mother said when she opened the door was, You look thinner, Ellie. Anyway, you need to learn to let go. That's life. I sat on the couch, my chest tightening. You knew about Avery and Thomas, didn't you? She nodded, like I'd just mentioned some passing afternoon rain. Avery told me once everything was clear. She didn't want to keep it a secret. Thomas admitted to her that he felt lonely in the marriage. It just happened because they both needed someone who understood them. I clenched my fists until my nails nearly dug into my skin. Did you just say understood each other? I'm not saying you were wrong, Ellie. But don't rush to judge. Avery deserves love too. You know she was hurt badly in her last relationship. I stood up, the room suddenly felt freezing. My dad sat in the corner, eyes glued to the TV. I asked, "What about you, Dad? What do you think?" He just shrugged. I don't like it, but it happened. No point staying angry forever. I don't remember how I walked out of that house. Just that on the drive home, I was numb. Childhood memories came flooding back, being grounded for coming home late while Avery got a pass, driving an old car while Avery got a brand new SUV, because she needed the safety. All of it came together now like a puzzle, and I was the missing piece. A few days later, while sipping morning coffee in my new apartment, I got a notification on my phone. A friend had sent me a link to Avery's profile. I hesitated, then clicked. At the top of the page was a photo. Avery in a floral dress standing in a field of tall grass, Thomas hugging her from behind, kissing her cheek. The caption read, "Peace is being loved the right way." I stared at the screen, numb. It wasn't the image that hit me, I had expected it. It was the fact she had tagged me in the post. No apology, no explanation, just a short note. "Hope you'll understand someday. I've always loved you, sis." I didn't reply. I exhaled long and slow, then deleted the app. I had no reason to see anything from the person who stole my life, and flaunted it like a trophy. That afternoon I blocked Avery's number. Then my mother's, then my father's. No more tears, no more hope. I transferred all my savings into a new bank account under my name only. The apartment wasn't where I planned to stay forever, but at least it didn't carry the scent of betrayal. I also changed my phone number and erased my old address from everything. From that moment on, I was no longer Avery's sister, or Thomas's ex-wife. I left Charlotte on a drizzly October morning, red leaves drifting gently across the hood like a quiet goodbye. I didn't tell anyone, no friends, no coworkers, and certainly not my family. I cleared my location history, closed every social media account, and drove straight to Vermont, a place I'd only been once as a child but always dreamed of returning to. I rented a small cabin on the outskirts of Burlington, near Lake Champlain. No one here knew who I was, and I didn't need to be anyone. Just Ellie. The woman learning how to breathe again after a storm called betrayal. The first few months, I barely left the house. I walked by the lake, wrote in my journal, and read more than I ever had. But one sleepless night, I looked at myself in the mirror and realized, if I didn't get up, the past would consume me. So I called the local therapy center and booked my first appointment. My therapist's name was Melissa, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a voice like a rainy afternoon lullaby. For nearly a year I went every week, slowly peeling back layers of anger and pain. Some days I sat in silence, some days I cried until I couldn't speak. But I kept going, because I knew only by facing it could I truly move on. About 10 months in, Melissa gently suggested I open myself to life again. "Ellie, you've come far enough to stop being the victim. It's time to choose what you want, not just avoid what you fear." I listened. I started taking part-time office management gigs. Nothing huge, but enough to feel like I was rebuilding, brick by brick. Then, one late autumn afternoon, I stopped by an Italian restaurant to reserve a table for our company's Christmas dinner. That's when I met James. He was the owner and the head chef. Tall, a bit scruffy, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing a small scar on his left elbow. He smiled and asked me what dish I liked best. A simple question, but his voice was anything but ordinary. We only talked for a moment, but a few days later I came back. Not to book anything, just to try the lasagna he said was made from his mom's recipe. After that I came every week, first by myself, Then he offered me a glass of wine. The next time, he sat with me and asked about the book I was reading. James never asked about my past, never needed to know why I came to Vermont, or why I sometimes drifted into silence mid-conversation. He was just there, close enough to feel safe, never so close that I felt smothered. We started dating officially after 4 months. 2 years later, he proposed by the lake under the first snow. I said yes, no fear, no doubt. For the first time in my life, I wasn't gambling. Now I'm 39, we have 2 sons, Caleb who's 3, and Noah who just turned 8 months. I manage operations for the restaurant chain James runs with his twin brother Josh. Life is busy, sometimes chaotic, but full of laughter and sticky little hands, giving unexpected hugs. I don't look back anymore. I don't need to. Everything I lost led me here, to a real home, a real family, and a love I no longer have to question. I thought I'd close that door to the past forever, locked it like an old book I never wanted to reopen. But the past, like it always does, has a way of finding its way back when you least expect it. One June afternoon, just after I picked Caleb up from preschool, my phone buzzed with a delivery notification from an unnamed address. I didn't think much of it and opened the package while Noah cried for milk. Inside was a cream-colored wedding invitation adorned with pressed dried flowers, in shiny gold letters. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Star Andrews and Thomas Williams. I froze. My heartbeat slowed, refusing to believe what I was reading. But that wasn't all. Tucked inside was a handwritten letter, in my mother's handwriting. Dear Ellie, we are family. Things in the past were difficult, but family is unchangeable. We hope you'll come. Star would love for you to be a bridesmaid, just like you once chose her. Let love heal everything. I didn't know how much I was shaking as I folded the paper. One thought echoed in my mind. They really think I could stand next to Star, and smile while she walks toward the man who once called me his wife? I didn't reply. I shredded the invitation and threw it in the trash. As for the letter, I folded it neatly and burned it in the fireplace that night, just to be sure nothing remained. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, while prepping dinner at the restaurant with James, the manager pulled me aside with an awkward look. Ellie? There's a man asking for you, says he's your ex-husband. I froze. And just like he said, in the back garden, where guests rarely went, Thomas was standing there. White shirt, loose tie, hair too neatly brushed but still messy in that unnatural way. His eyes were red, like he'd been driving all night. Ellie, he started when he saw me. I don't know where to begin. Good, then don't, I said, cold as ice. Please, just 1 minute, just to explain. I crossed my arms. You've got 1 minute, start. He took a deep breath, then said, Avery cheated. With at least 2 people. One of them was a business partner of mine. I know it's too late now, but I need closure. I need to hear you say, No, I cut him off. I don't owe you forgiveness. You want closure? Look for it in the decision you made back then. You had a wife, a home, a family, and you threw it all away for some illusion with someone who always thought the world revolved around her. And now what? Avery betrayed you just like she betrayed me. Is that clear enough? Thomas lowered his head, but I didn't stop. I don't need closure. I have a new life, a real family. What I need is for you to disappear from all of it, forever. James appeared behind me, alert. He didn't say a word, just stepped next to me and rested his hand on my shoulder. That was enough for Thomas to understand. He no longer had a place here. Before leaving, Thomas turned one last time. I truly am sorry, Ellie. I gave a faint smile. You're sorry for the consequences, not for what you did. And there's a world of difference between the two. He turned away and walked quickly toward the car parked at the end of the street. That night, I sat on the back porch, holding a mug of herbal tea, listening to Noah's soft cries from inside. James came out and sat next to me. You okay? He asked. I nodded. He came looking for closure, but I realized I never needed it because the moment I walked away from the past, I closed that chapter myself. James held my hand, and I knew there was nothing left to say. I had made the right choice, and the past was now just a lesson, not a place to return to. It's been 4 years since I said my final words to Thomas and shut the door on my blood family. I didn't think they'd ever have a reason to contact me again. But then, on a winter afternoon as snow began falling lightly in Burlington, everything changed. In the most unexpected way. I had just picked up Noah from daycare when I saw an unfamiliar email in my inbox. The subject line read, "Urgent about star, please read." Attached was a file, the sender, my mother. I was about to delete it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe just curiosity, made me pause. I opened it. Inside was a hastily written message and a photo of a medical report. No sugarcoating. Avery Starr, as she insisted on being called, was in end-stage kidney failure. Doctors said she needed a transplant as soon as possible or time was running out. At the bottom were desperate pleas. You are your sister's only hope. The doctors say immediate family members are most likely to be a match. You can get tested in Minnesota, we're not forcing you, but please, Ellie, just consider it. I set the phone down, overwhelmed by a feeling I couldn't quite name. I wasn't angry, not anymore. But I didn't feel pity either. Just a long silence, as if the universe was testing me one last time. That night I told James. He didn't overreact, he just looked at me for a long time and said, "I can't decide for you. But whatever you choose, I'll be here." It took me 3 days to decide. Then I went to the hospital in Burlington to have my blood tested, asking them to compare it with Avery's records at the hospital in Missouri. I said nothing to my mother. I replied to no one. If the results came back incompatible, it would all end there. But life isn't that simple. A week later I got a call from the transplant center. The doctor's voice was clear. "Ms. Ellie, the good news is you and the patient have an extremely rare match, almost perfect." I exhaled deeply, heart pounding so hard I had to sit down. Oddly, what made me shiver wasn't the good news. It was the fact that from this moment on, I held the life of someone who once destroyed mine. I sent a short email to my mother confirming I was a match. But I made it clear. I will come to Missouri. Alone. No kids, no James. I will go to the hospital and nowhere else, and I'm not committing to anything until I hear everything. From everyone. I took a red-eye flight and landed in freezing St. Louis. As I walked into the hospital lobby, I spotted my mother immediately. Her hair now gray, her frame thinner. My father sat nearby, his head in his hands. They stood when they saw me. "Ellie!" my mom called, her voice breaking. I didn't respond. I walked straight to the doctor's office. The meeting was quiet, broken only by the sound of papers flipping and the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, the doctor turned to me. "If you agree, we can schedule the surgery within 2 weeks. Star's condition is very critical." I nodded but said clearly, "I want to see her, just me and Avery, no one else." A few minutes later, I entered the hospital room. Avery was lying there, pale, her hair thinning, eyes a mix of relief and panic when she saw me. But instead of saying something kind, the first thing out of her mouth was, "I knew you wouldn't abandon me." I sat beside her, looked straight into her eyes and said, "Avery, you're right. I am the only one who can save you. But what you got wrong is thinking I'd do it just because we share blood." Her face went pale. I didn't stop. "You took my husband, shattered my trust, then flaunted the betrayal. This entire family stayed silent while it happened, and now they come back only because they need me. No real apology, no acknowledgement of what was done." I stood up, my gaze colder than ever. "I'll think about it, but not for you, for my 2 sons. So one day they'll know their mother did the right thing, even in the most painful moment." And I walked out, leaving behind a face full of shock and fear, because for the first time, Avery realized. Every choice has a price. I returned to the hospital the next morning after a sleepless night. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted every word I said to be clear, calm, and impossible to misinterpret. I had lived for others once. Now, I lived to protect myself. And my children. When I entered the room, Avery was there, even thinner, her skin an eerie shade of gray under the harsh hospital lights. My parents stood on either side of her like lifeless statues, their presence suffocating and strange. But I only looked at Avery. I pulled up a chair, placed the medical file on the table beside me. No theatrics, no setup. Avery, I began, slow and steady. I got my test results, and yes, I'm a perfect match. Her eyes widened, lips trembling like she was about to cry with relief. But I didn't give her the chance. But I will not donate my kidney to you. The room froze. Avery's body went rigid. My mother gasped. Ellie, what are you saying? This is your sister's life. I turned to my mother, her eyes now wet, not with regret but with disappointment that her plan wasn't unfolding as expected. You call her my sister, the one who slept with my husband then posted pictures online like a trophy? The one who tagged me in a photo of them hugging just to prove she'd won? I looked back at Avery. She couldn't hold it together anymore. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for my hand. Ellie, I was wrong. I know. But you're the only one who can save me, please. Don't let me die. I pulled my hand away, eyes sharp as steel. You're not dying because I'm saying no. You're living the consequences of your own choices. You picked betrayal. You destroyed everything. And now, this is the result. I stood, pulled a paper from my pocket and placed it on the table, a copy of the test results. Then I looked at all three of them one final time. This is the only thing I'll leave behind. No thank yous. No further contact. And if you try to reach out again, I'll have my lawyer handle it. My mother was stunned. My father said nothing, he never did. As I turned to leave, Avery cried out behind me, voice shaking and desperate. Ellie, how can you live with this decision? I didn't stop, didn't turn around, just answered calmly. Easily, because for the first time in my life I chose myself. That night, I returned to Burlington, into the arms of James and our two boys. Caleb ran to hug me like I'd come home from some epic adventure, and Noah smiled wide, waving his little hands in the air. I told James everything. He didn't ask if I regretted it, he just held me for a long time, and said, I'm proud of you, truly. I know some people might say I was too harsh, that I let someone die, but they haven't lived my story. They weren't betrayed, they weren't pushed out by their own blood. They didn't have to rebuild from nothing, with a shattered heart and barely a thread of hope. I didn't choose Avery's ending, she wrote it herself, page by page. And I chose to start a new book, with James, with my children, with the peace I've fought for years to find. And I know, if anyone ever asks me if I have regrets, the answer will always be, no. My story isn't just about escaping betrayal, it's about reclaiming self-worth from a wreckage that once seemed beyond repair. I used to think I needed my family to survive until they turned their backs and I stood tall anyway. Now, I'm not the woman who was betrayed by her husband and sister. I'm a mother, a wife, a woman who chose her own peace and lives it fully, every single day. Do you think Ellie was too harsh? Or was she finally doing what she deserved to do to protect herself? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more real-life stories and powerful lessons about family.